Welcome to Candidate Spotlight, a production of Arlington Independent Media. I'm Ted Billich, your host, and today we have the opportunity to speak with Christian Dorsey. Christian is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for a county board seat here in Arlington, Virginia. Christian, welcome.
Thank you, Ted.
It's good to have the opportunity to sit down and talk with you about the issues. One of the things that I have heard quite often, because I'm affiliated with the Economic Development Commission, is the issue of economic development in Arlington and whether the strategy on the margin should be hunting whales or gathering fish. If you're making those sorts of allocation decisions, are we as a county better off looking for large anchor economic development or fostering small business development over time?
Well, certainly, Ted, I think that you do an all of the above approach, but if you're thinking about where you prioritize those sources, the whale environment is changing a lot, but what is ever dynamic and ever present are the smaller fish, the entrepreneurs, the startups, the folks who may not be heavily capitalized looking to take up entire buildings or entire floors, but who collectively can really move the dial in the right direction. And if you look at the market for those whales, whether it be the federal government or large firms, what they're doing in terms of the footprints that they're occupying, it's changing rapidly. And if we devote our efforts to that, we're really going to build the kind of product that doesn't suit the market. What we really need to think about are those innovative startup firms and those entrepreneurs who can get up to speed quickly and who can, through their growth, really move the economic dial in the right direction.
In light of that, I was looking at full-time equivalents in Arlington Economic Development. BizLaunch, great program, a single full-time equivalent and a single consultant. Should there be greater resources being put toward that sort of business formation support?
Well, I am the answer is yes, and I'm a strong supporter in figuring out how you actually incubate entrepreneurial activity. And this is something that's a challenge in Arlington, where space is found at a premium, where we don't necessarily have a long history of supporting those small businesses. But if you think about some of the innovative communities across the country, what you see there is an ecosystem where someone with a great idea, with an idea of how they tap into a market that exists, if they're able to get up to speed quickly with minimal hassle, they have a chance to thrive. Whereas in our community, it seems it's a little bit easier if you're more established, you've had success either here or elsewhere, you may be able to find a way to grow a bit, but we're doing a poor job of incubating that startup activity. So absolutely more resources, not only in the case of FTEs, but really a strategy. We're developing a retail strategy, but we need a larger strategy to figure out how we not only deal with the market as it is, but become flexible enough to deal with the market as it evolves, because it does so rapidly.
You touched upon another important issue, which is more resources, where to spend the money that we have. It is very easy to talk about million-dollar bus stops, to talk about Artisphere, to talk about the streetcar, big projects that some have questioned in retrospect. On the margin, what are we spending too much on right now? Ignoring the easy targets.
Sure.
What is it that's in the current budget right now that could be reduced in some way, so that to the extent that we wanted to have better resources or greater resources available, we could do so without raising taxes?
Well, sure. One of the things that we do in Arlington a lot is to plan and to have process and meetings. Now, in theory, those are great things to do in your community, but you have to be mindful of when those processes become just woeful wastes of time and resources. So, when you have a process that doesn't have a clear objective, a clear charge, that just goes on and on and on, that's just not a waste of time. That's a waste of staff resources. That may result in having more consultants that you need at a given point in time who are engaged for longer than they need. So my first priority is to figure out what are efficiencies that can be had. We're not at the point where we have line items that you can identify in the budget. Waste, fraud, and abuse, get rid of it and you're good. But it's finding efficiencies throughout the whole budget to figure out, are we actually delivering maximum value and achieving our objectives. That's what we have to do.
Target-rich answer, because to me there are a couple of aspects of that I'd like to probe deeper. First of all, every one of the major projects that I mentioned, Artisphere, the streetcar, the bus stop,
yes.
Each of them had substantial process attached to it.
Yes.
Each of them had consultant reports underlying them upon which staff and the county board premised a decision. And yet each of them
didn't work out so well.
Didn't work out so well. What is going on here? And what, as a county board member, can you do to try to make sure that the foundation for decision making is as solid as we'd like it to be?
You know, some of it's complicated and some of it's not. And the four that you've referenced are ones, the reason why they've resonated in our community so much, because they're not complicated. Let's take the Artisphere, for example, since, you know, we're nearing the time where our investment in it ostensibly ends, but that's another story. The Artisphere was premised on a very flawed methodology. So I don't care how many consultants you have or how many reports you file, if you believe that an innovative art space that's designed to showcase emerging talent can, within a period of a couple of years, be self-sustaining, you don't know what you're doing. And in that case, we had no business premising our investment in that project on that very fundamental, completely out of reality premise. And it was destined to fail in the eyes of, you know, what we said of it from the very beginning, and also in the eyes of the community. So first, you actually have to have policy that reflects reality. You know, recognizing that if you want to commit to the arts, you can't have a revenue neutral expectation within a couple of years, if at all. If you're going to do a transportation investment, it actually has to move people where they need to go, as opposed to just being shiny and new. If you want to create amenities for the community, they actually have to meet the needs of what people are saying they want. That's the fundamental way you do good policy that works.
And yet, time and time again, we have seen process, sometimes going back years,
yes, yes,
that nevertheless has been resulting in what we later second guess as suboptimal decision making.
Yes.
Does that mean that the process itself is flawed?
You know, yes and no. And I'll give you a great example. Last night I took a wonderful walking tour in Crystal City. And, you know, if people haven't seen Crystal City recently, there's a lot of change afoot. But one of the things that we discussed were some of the multimodal improvements for Crystal Drive and how to integrate bike lanes into the traffic network. And when the process started 7 years ago, there was a conventional wisdom. Over the course of the 7 years or the 5 years it took for the process to result in a plan, data emerges and the conventional wisdom changes. Our processes haven't always reflected that change. So by the time we ink something that's gone through a many years process, it's behind the times or not exactly hitting where, you know, the best practices are. So it's fine to have process. It's wonderful to involve people in decision making. You've also got to be flexible to make sure you don't have something that's obsolete as soon as it's done.
Well, that does to me raise the question of whether in some way or another the Arlington Way is obsolete. That in this day and age, major policy decision making cannot be as, well, the business community would say laborious. Others would say at least exhausting. It needs to be nimbler.
Yes.
Do you agree with that sentiment?
I do to a large degree. I've been involved in the commission sphere in Arlington for a very long time, and I can tell you that sometimes we devolve into excessive substance, getting into the minutia of details. I am all for a public airing of the essential issues, making sure we're right on the vision, making sure we're right on the impacts and understanding how this will be affecting our community long into the future. You then do lose something, however, if you involve too many cooks in figuring out how much salt you add, and you know, whether or not you put it in a tureen or a regular soup bowl. These are things that you know, should better be left not to experts. I'm not suggesting that there's a hierarchy here, but there needs to be some flexibility to ultimately make sure it works. From a planning perspective, it's great to decide you want retail in a building, but I want the person who's actually going to build it to be able to have the flexibility to design that space so that when it comes online, it meets the market, not what the market was 7 years ago when it was proposed.
One of the reasons why people have hesitancy about modifying the Arlington Way is that, frankly, there are a lot of stakeholders who have a vested interest in the current system. It's nice to be a commissioner. It's nice to say that you're on a commission for something. Does somebody on the county board need to stand up and say, well, we need to look at whether this structure is of value or whether there are alternatives that are better? First of all, do you think that it's that deep that we really need to rethink the commission structure?
I don't think the structure of the commissions is the problem. I think it's the expectations of the commissions and the latitude with which everyone involved in the Arlington Way tends to give the commissions to work things out on their own. So, for example, simple issues can sometimes take multiple meetings lasting over multiple months to get a recommendation or to get an idea. And there needs to be clear expectations about how long things should reasonably take. And, we often do not have a realistic expectation of what's desired. Often you'll hear this term consensus. And consensus is an awfully difficult thing to achieve, nor is it necessarily relevant for every process. At some point, sometimes you have to take a vote, sometimes you just have to get a clear sense of the temperature of the room and leave it to other people to make decisions. But getting to the point where everyone who can impact the process at any time they want, having it so that they are comfortable with it can take forever sometimes, and that's what we see.
I know that you've been involved in the Planning Commission for a number of years.
Yes.
I know you have heard the business community's concerns about the Planning Commission. Are there any benchmarking data about how fast things move through Arlington relative to our peer jurisdictions? In other words, is there really a planning issue endemic to Arlington? Or does planning always take longer than the business community wishes and always cost more?
I doubt we'll ever get to the point where the planning community would look at any jurisdiction that has special exception review processes and think, oh, they're doing it exactly right. That's probably never going to happen, and I think if you ever got to that point, you're probably doing something wrong, because speed is something that is of an absolute premium for the business community, and the sense of getting it right and feeling like you're making the right decisions, that's the guiding ethos of the municipality. So the goal is not to bring them perfectly in sync, but it's to really recognize where, if you're the municipality, am I stifling the kind of business growth and success that I'm actually trying to cultivate? Because let's ultimately remember what this is for. I want a project to actually come online, put people in homes or put people in offices, serve the community so that it not just generates tax dollars but is an integral part of our landscape. That's my goal. So anything that I'm doing that delays that unnecessarily or prevents that from happening at all, I want to root out. I want to solve that because it's not in my best interest at all. Having the business community wait for the sake of waiting is just idiotic policy.
When talking about policy making, obviously the way that our structure is we have a county board that is to set policy and a county manager who executes on that policy. What, if anything, would you change about the dynamics of the county board, county manager relationship during the last 4 or 5 years?
Well, I think when we have an opportunity to choose the next county manager, what I'm especially looking for is someone who is able to look me and my fellow board members in the eye and say, I think the way you have prescribed moving on this policy is a mistake, and I'm going to tell you why. And to have a county manager who is empowered and willing to engage in that back and forth, because I'm going to do the same thing with them. And I don't want a situation where I feel like our county is being shortchanged by not getting the best advice of what professionals bring to the table. I've heard all too often from county staff that they pursue avenues of work, they pursue ways of doing things because they think it will please the board, even if it's not what they think is the best thing to do for the county. I want to root out that culture. Whether that's the fault of staff or the fault of the board doesn't really matter to me. That's got to stop. There's got to be a way for the board and the staff through the county manager to have that honest airing so that we can actually do what's right for Arlington, not what's right for a particular board member or a particular county manager.
When you say that, that makes perfect sense to me. It also strikes me as something that one would expect the board to have already done.
Yes.
And the county manager to have already recognized and addressed. What is it that has inhibited that sort of conversation in the past? And then the follow-up being, what would you do differently as one of 5 members of a board that might not always see eye to eye to nevertheless address that issue?
You know, one of the things that I think is integral for any high-functioning organization, and through my history I've had a chance to, and the privilege to run a few, but organizational planning, strategic planning is the key to make sure you have a shot at accomplishing that objective, where you absolutely know where it is you're trying to go. And I'm not just talking about the planning that comes from the annual budget. I'm talking about multi-year planning, where you can actually use that as a benchmark for the progress that you're making. But when things are just thrown into the hopper every year, and you have a rotating chairman who may have his or her priorities, and you have a budget that's decided on a yearly basis, and you have no strategic plan guiding you forward, this is where you get this whole idea of what do we need to do to please this person, that person, and the other. But if you have a guiding document, a guiding vision that you have decided amongst yourselves and communicated with the wider public, that provides, I think, a great opportunity to get past that.
When you're in a primary, you're always dealing with the issue of how do you differentiate yourself from the other candidates for that position. I'd like to ask you a different question, though.
Sure.
We were talking before we started this conversation on tape that there may be a sense of need for some sort of change. How would you differentiate yourself from the incumbents in order to satisfy a need for change, if that need exists?
I think I'm a pretty innovative person by nature, and let me describe what that means. I like to be deliberative in the sense that I absorb information to try to make great decisions. But at some point, you have to realize that the decision has to be made, and you have to try things, and you have to recognize that your goal is to pursue the best course of action based on all of the evidence and smart thinking that you can assemble, and that you move to try and make it work, and to be ready, if it doesn't, to move in a different direction. And to know what that direction is because you've already looked at it as part of your process. And what I think has happened in Arlington collectively, this is not an indictment of any single board member, but collectively, we have lost that spirit of innovation. We have become so deliberative and risk averse in some cases, to then also becoming obsessed with signature initiatives, that we have lost sight of how you're innovative towards a strategic goal. And I think that's something that makes me unique and effective for this time. It's part of the reason why I've chosen now, as opposed to any other time in the past few years, to actually seek this seat, because I think what we need and what I have to offer are actually quite compatible now.
It is a different sort of circumstance that we find ourselves in than we've faced in the last 10 or 15 years. We are used to, for better or worse, essentially one-party government in Arlington, Virginia, and we don't have that anymore. With John Weistat coming on, with there being a number of other county board members who are very independent in their thinking. There is perhaps not as much sense that we all make the decision together and then we announce the decision. how do you work with people of very different political backgrounds and nevertheless reach the important decisions you need to reach?
You know, I think the first thing is to figure out why you're in it. And that's the temperature I want to take of every one of the colleagues that I seek to work with. If you're in it to appease a national political conversation or the perception of a party's perspective, then we're going to have a tough time, because I'm an evidence-based. I want to move Arlington forward for the benefit of what the community has collectively decided is our vision. And I think if you tap into that, the partisan divisions that may exist really become not irrelevant. You're always going to have dissension, but they become workable, because you know that there's going to be an interplay of ideas. And that's what I'm going to seek to foster on the county board, an interplay of ideas and not turf. So if we get that, if we have that interplay of ideas and decision making that's from that, as opposed to turf wars, then I think we'll be fine. And I think this so-called division will actually be healthy for us moving forward.
When you think about the budget over the next 5 years, do you perceive Arlington in a position of a growing pie or a situation of constraint?
I think over the 5-year period we will have a growing pie. I think if we are aggressive with economic development and do a lot of the things that we talked about of creating opportunity at the entrepreneurial and startup level, we will see economic growth. If we simply are waiting for the federal government to not be in contraction, then we may be in trouble. But if we seek to generate that activity that can happen and ramp up really quickly, I think we will see growth. It will not be growth that we experienced in the late 90s or early 2000s. Let's get that out. Let's get that out of our projections. But certainly, I think wages will continue to improve for people who live here. If we see some better business activity, we will see some modest growth in the 5-year period, which will take a little bit of the pressure off of the taxpayer a little bit. If your wages are rising, you become a little less sensitive to every single nickel of increase in your tax bills.
Mm-hmm. Some have said that sequestration is going to be an ongoing challenge for the DC Metro generally, but Arlington in particular. What, if anything, do you think the county should be doing right now to prepare for the ongoing sequestration process and its possible impacts on our budget?
Yeah, you know, the sequestration has had, just like BRAC, a lagging impact on Arlington. It didn't hit right away. So I think a lot of people, you know, when they heard these things in the news and then the sky didn't fall, they thought, oh, it's no big deal. Well, these things take a little bit of time to work their way through the economy, and we're just really starting to feel the effects in a meaningful way of sequestration. It's going to continue for a couple of years. Fairfax probably has it a bit worse. That said, I think what we have to recognize is we've got to grow the number of business opportunities that are not reliant on federal spending in Arlington, diversification of our economic base, continuing to attract people who don't work for the federal government or for federal contractors. We need to have a kind of community that attracts that kind of activity, because when you have an area that's in stagnation at best, but as we know, contraction, you have to figure out what are the other areas where you can grow. And that's really going to come from the workforce and from business opportunities.
What impact, as hopefully, if things go well for you, 1 of 5, what impact do you believe you can have personally over the next 5 years in trying to place Arlington on that trajectory, a trajectory of growth as opposed to a trajectory that is relatively stagnant?
You know, one of the things I think, you know, anybody who's working for the county, whether they be someone in the planning department, economic development department, or serving on the county board, they ought to figure out how to best, you know, I guess the word is market, but really it's position the community so that people who are in a position to invest understand why Arlington is a good place to invest. So one, it's being Arlington's not just chief cheerleader, but chief substantive champion to make sure that businesses in the community, when they're thinking about where they should be, they understand fully the advantages of Arlington. When We think about how to attract new people to live in Arlington. We talk about not just what makes Arlington great, but the kind of vision that we have moving forward, that it's going to be a place, hopefully if I'm on the board, where affordable opportunities for people at all levels of income can live and thrive and benefit. So this is the kind of thing that I think the board has to take an active role in, not to rely on past performance to be indicative of future results, but to actually push that agenda forward.
So starting with the end in mind is always a good thing. If you're looking back 10 years from now and you have become a member of the board and you are thinking about retirement,
Yes.
what is it that you look back on and you say is a signature achievement that you wish to be able to count 10 years from now?
You know, the feeling that I hear from so many people when I walk around is insecurity. People are wondering if the Arlington that they know is going to be able to continue. They wonder if we're competent because they see sidewalks that don't get fixed, pedestrian safety issues that go on for years and years, and they worry about school capacity and overcrowding, and they're just wondering if we're capable of delivering all of the promise that they've imbued in Arlington. So after 8 years, I'm retiring from the board. I'd love to be able to go into communities, door knock as I'm doing now, and for people to have the strong sense of confidence that, wow, we actually tackled our tough problems and we have a sustainable path moving forward. This is going to be a solid community moving forward. And if they can attribute any work that I did towards that goal, I'll be a happy man.
Christian, that's all the time that we have today to have this conversation. It's been a delightful conversation, and I wish you the best of luck over the next couple of weeks and maybe into the months to come.
Thank you.
Again, this is all the time that we have today. I appreciate you joining us for Candidate Spotlight, a production of Arlington Independent Media. Until next time, I'm your host, Ted Billage.